day, everyone. My name is Maryann, and over the past few sessions, we were making different blocks to put into a sampler quilt. And once we have the 12 blocks, we'll go ahead and make the sampler quilt. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of deviate a little bit this week. And I'm going to show you how to make this magic pillowcase. And the reason it's magic is the way you turn it at the end, and also the fact that no seams, no raw seams are going to be showing when we're done. To make this, you need 3 pieces of fabric. The first one here is going to be about 10.5 inches by 45 inches, which is the width of the fabric, and that's called the cuff. So this is my cuff. The next thing for the body is going to be 26 inches by 45 inches, or the width of the fabric. Most fabrics come either 42 or 44 inches wide. And believe me, that's plenty for a pillow. You may even want to cut it down to that size. Then the last thing is a little bit of contrasting trim. And I chose this brown to go with footballs. And you're going to need 3 inches by 45 inches, or 3 inches by the width of the fabric. And actually, I think I decided, yeah, I'm using a strip that was 2.5 inches, and that's what I'm going to use instead of the 3 inches. What we're going to do now is layer these 3 components. So I'm going to take the cuff fabric, which is this, and keep it right side up. Okay, so this is the right side. And then I'm going to take the folded trim fabric. So I need to press this trim fabric in half. And you may have noticed it has a design on the one side. I am not using the design side. I'm using the plain side for this. So I'm going to press it in half. The whole width of the fabric. And some people, well, you'll see how large the trim comes out when we finish the pillowcases. Some people like the trim to be a little bit narrower. That's your preference. Again, you don't have to have it this size. You don't even have to have the trim. You could just make it with the cuff and the main body. Somehow I'm not doing this very even. Press this a little bit better. This is why some people would rather pin it, but I would rather just fight with it to get it the right way. And as you know, the fabric will have selvages on the side. We don't really want to use those. So if we can get away with letting that extend and cutting them off, we can do that. Okay, now I have my trim all folded here. So now we're going to take the body is this. And you have to be careful if you're using a directional fabric. This doesn't really have much of a direction because some of the players are up and some of the players are down. But if you have a directional fabric, you do need to be careful with that. You need to be careful when you cut it, first of all, and then you need to be careful which way you want it to go, whether you want the cuff to be on this side or the cuff on this side. I'm going to take this, put it right side down. This is the selvage I was talking about. I'm going to go ahead and let it extend so that it's not part of the seam in the end. And actually, you could pin the cuff at the same time, which I think I will go ahead and do. Just pin everything together. It's been a while since I've made this particular pillowcase, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm really putting everything in the right direction and the right order here, so it's going to come out right for you. So what I have right now is the body of it, the little piece of trim, and then the cuff. And like I said, some people make it without the trim. I kind of like the trim though. If I have the fabric to do it, I do it with the trim. So I'm pinning the 3 pieces all along the width of the fabric. These pillowcases are a lot of fun for kids too. If you get their favorite team, or if they have a favorite character, or if it's a little girl, maybe she likes flowers, you can make them a very personal pillowcase. Okay, this is pinned and ready to sew, but I want to show you all 3 pieces of fabric are a little different size. The body of the fabric is the size that I cut that I want it to be. These 2 are going to extend. That's fine. I'm just going to sew to the end of the body, and I'm going to cut that off in the end. Same thing on this side. I purposely started it a little tiny bit away from the edge, and we can cut that part off. With a pillowcase, you don't need to do the 1/4 inch seam. You can do a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch. And as you're sewing, just check periodically to make sure you're catching all 3 on the edge. If you don't have a foot that is the width you want to use, there are markings on the plate of your machine that you can use to decide how wide you want the seam to be. The other thing you can always do if you want to be sure that you have the seam the width you want is take a piece of masking tape and tape it on the floor of your machine right here where you want to run the fabric against, and that'll give you a nice even seam too. So there's a lot of different tricks you can do to have a nice even seam. actually prefer either using my needle as a guide, I'm sorry, not my needle, my foot as a guide, or the tape. I find it hard to follow the little lines on the machine. Okay, we're almost to the end here. Then I can show you the magical part. If you're looking for additional directions for this, you can also find it online under Quilts of Valor. It's called different things, but the Quilts of Valor uses this as their pattern. Okay, we've sewn all that. And now what I'm going to do is just trim these edges where the fabrics are all different widths. I'm going to trim them to size up with the body. I like to have my ruler on the part of the fabric that's my good fabric so that I don't accidentally cut on an angle and cut the piece of fabric I want to use as my good fabric. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off to be even with that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other edge. Okay. And now you'll have a piece that will come like this. And what we're going to do next is take this part, kind of fold it or roll it up. You're going to take it and kind of fold it or roll it up. So that it will fit inside the cuff. And you're going to take the cuff, make sure you're not touching the inside, and you're going to sew it to the edge. And again, make sure your rolled fabric isn't caught in the seam. Now for this part, I really do pin it because I want to make sure that I'm pushing that body of the fabric away from where I'm going to be stitching. With every section that I'm pinning, I kind of make sure I'm pushing that inside fabric away from where I'm going to sew. For some reason, my cuff fabric is extending a little bit beyond the other, but we can take care of that afterwards. But right now, we're going to go ahead and sew this long seam. sausage done here. And we're going to do the magic part. We're going to pull it out. So I'm going to pull it out from the middle. Just keep pulling. Here you have the body, the little design piece, and your cuff. I'm going to press that, and then we're going to go ahead and do the side seams and the bottom, and I'll show you how we do that so that none of your seams will be exposed. And as I said, this part here between the cuff and the body is really optional. You don't need to use it. I think it adds a little bit of extra. Okay, just going to trim off these edges here. Now, what little boy or adult football fan wouldn't love to have a pillowcase like this? They would especially like to have it if it was done in their favorite team. Cutting through quite a few layers of fabric here. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the pillowcase and we're going to sew it together on the good sides. Let me cut this off too. I see a little bit of sewage here. We're going to sew it together on the good side, and then we're going to turn the seam. It's called a French seam, so that the seam will be encased. Okay, so we're putting the wrong sides together, which is the opposite of what we would normally do. What I'm doing right now is just trying to match this flange piece so that it's going to be kind of even when we get done. Okay, ready to sew. I did the side seam, and now I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom seam. I took it out there because I wanted to even this out a little bit. And this pillowcase was actually made plenty wide, so and plenty long, so cutting this little bit off isn't going to damage anything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom seam. Now to avoid bulk, because we're going to do this French seam, I'm going to trim the corners a little bit so there's not so much bulk in the corners when we turn it. Be careful you just don't cut through your seam. Okay, now we're going to take the pillowcase. Whoops, more thread. I'm going to trim this too so it doesn't stick out. Okay. You're going to turn your pillowcase with the right side to the inside. And let's see if I have something to punch out these corners. Punch out your corners so you have a nice corner. And the other corner. Okay. You do not have to iron at this point, but I like to just to keep it kind of together when I'm sewing. So I'm going to bring that seam right to the center. When you sew this French seam, you need to make sure that it's a tiny bit wider than the seam that you use to sew it together on the right side because you don't want that seam to show. So I'm going to pull this out. By trimming that little piece off in the corner, it left me a much nicer corner to sew on, so it's not going to be quite as bulky for the sewing machine. Okay, just about done here. Okay, last seam and we're done. And as I said, this seam has to be a little bit wider than what you use for the other seam. Okay, we're ready to turn the pillowcase right side out, and hopefully it'll look okay, and there will be no exposed seams. Everything will be encased. So here we go. Okay. These corners are a tiny bit thick because you've got the fabric from the first seam in there. So you do want to pull them out a little bit. Okay, press the seams and you are done. So here's your pillowcase. If you look inside, no exposed seams. Everything's encased, and you've got your pillowcase that every young man or old man would enjoy having as a little gift. So here you go. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And as I said, if you don't like the flange, you don't need to put it. I personally like it. So, thank you for being with me today. We'll see you again next time.